Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe. Heavenly Father, as we come before today, our desire as always is to glorify you, to be obedient to your word. And Lord, as your word speaks about today, to allow ourselves to be sent, to allow ourselves to go where you would lead us. Your word is a lamp to our feet, and light to our path. And Lord, just enable us all to follow that path. We lift up those who are traveling today, John and Batya and Ron and Charlene, and who knows how many others. But I pray that you would keep your hand of protection upon them, so that they can continue to do your word. In your name, I pray all these things. Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. Okay. So partly to check line levels, and partly to open in a joke, because I've heard that's a good idea. You may not be able to tell, but John usually opens with a joke. You just can't always tell. So there was an old man who was in the hospital in a coma. And every single day, his wife would be there as soon as visiting hours opened to the time visiting hours closed. She'd be there by his side, waiting to see him the first time he opened his eyes. And she was there for months, and finally, he opened his eyes. Moved his hands a little bit. And he turned to look and says, "Oh, you're here." He said, yes, darling, I'm here. What do you need?" He says, "My darling, you've always been here for me. When we got in that car accident, you were there for me. When my business failed, you were there for me. When I got really sick and I couldn't work for 3 months, you were there for me. Darling, I'm starting to think you're bad luck." All right. Before I get started, who here read the portions this week? All three of them. Aaron did? Okay. Anybody read one of the portions? Just the Torah portion? Just the Haftarah? Okay. Because we're going to be bouncing around through all three of them. As I certainly hope you're all aware, most of the time, the portions in the weekly readings are connected. Usually it's thematically, if they possibly can. And this, for example, this week, they all have to do with being sent, or sending. Sometimes they have a word that's used through all three of them, and that connects them all together. Sometimes there's a connection that's so subtle that you really got to be like an esoteric Talmudic and Torah scholar to see what the connection is. And sometimes, honestly, they're not connected at all. I'll admit that. Because a lot of times, especially around the holidays, we'll read a Torah portion, and the Haftarah is based on a holiday that's coming up or that just passed or something that's happened, a historic event in the Hebrew calendar. But generally, the portions are most of the time connected. Fortunately, today, the connection is really, really clear. In Numbers 13 through 15, we find the story of the 12 spies sent by Moshe to reconnoiter the promised land before the Israelites could enter into and conquer it. In fact, the name of the portion is taken from the phrase in Numbers, and I apologize because my Hebrew got screwed up here. Sh'lach lecha, Sh'lach lecha is the beginning, because that much is clear. Send thou men that they may search the land of Canaan. It also includes the story of what they saw there. Some pretty fantastic stuff. It includes the report to Moshe and the people's response to that report, which is very important. And we know that all the people cried out. They were finally convinced to trust Adonai then, when he sentenced them all to roam the wilderness for 40 years, until the whole generation died off. Now, after hearing this, of course, the Israelites decided that then was the time to obey his word and go into Canaan, where they were roundly spanked by the Amalekites because they were not supposed to go in. Then chapter 15 contains some instructions for Israel to perform when they enter the land. These are genuinely important, well worth studying. They're not really germane to today's conversation, so we're just going to ignore them. In the Haftarah portion, Joshua, the protege of Moses, sends out 2 spies to see how difficult the land will be to conquer. Now remember, he was one of the guys who went in the first time. So he knew about the giants, the walled cities. He knew about, but he sent these two spies in to see how tough Jericho would be to conquer. Then there's this whole thing with Rahab and rooftops and closing of gates, and it's a whole thing. You've heard it before. In the Brit Hadashah portion, connection's a little more tenuous. Hebrews chapter 3. It begins with a speech by the Ruach HaKodesh, who appears to be the one sending out disciples into the world. The biggest connection is his admonition to not harden their hearts, as Israel did when they heard the report of the 12 spies. And then they were made to wander for 40 years. Then it contains exhortations to them all to alter those who are sent as to how they should support one another in their sending. A quick point here. Remember, when they each began in their ministries, in their going out, the various apostles had pretty big disagreements on how things should be done. Some fine points of theology and practice. They all agreed on the important stuff. Yeshua is Lord. Yeshua is God. Yeshua, death and resurrection is the only way to redeem our sinful state with the Lord on a permanent basis. But then on little things they would disagree on. A good example, Peter, at the beginning of Peter's ministry, even though he was the first one to evangelize to a Gentile, thought that all Gentile converts to the way should become Jews and should practice a fully Jewish lifestyle. Paul, we all know, actually told the Gentile believers, no, you need to stay what you are, Gentiles. There was some clashing there. They were both on the same side, but they both supported one another in their ministries. Now, through the author of the letter to the Hebrews, God doesn't tell them that they all need to agree about every little thing, but that they need to exhort and support one another. Remember that. Next time you're out discussing Messianic Judaism with an evangelical, or a Lutheran, or a Catholic, or an Orthodox Kabadnik, believe it or not, we're all on the same side. We're all worshiping God. So it's okay if they're wrong about a few things. Anyway, back to the point. The theme we see through all these passages is that of someone sending someone sending someone else, and then that someone being sent. That's a pretty easy concept, right? In Hebrew, the verb to send is sh'lach. The one who is sent is a shaliach, which is also the term used for the apostles, the shlichim. It would also be the appropriate term for the spies sent by Joshua and by Moses. They were sent out. So let's take a look at what it means to be chosen as a shaliach. Now, I've been doing a lot of job hunting recently. I think everybody here knows that. And every time you have a job listing, there are the requirements. You have to be able to. You have to be this to fulfill this job. And then this is what the job entails. So you can look and say, well, I have all those qualifications, but I can't do that, so I probably shouldn't apply to this job. It wouldn't work. The qualifications in Numbers 13, the second half of verse 2 through verse 3, the text says that every one of these men was a Nasi, their tribe. Nasi can be translated as ruler, boss, chief, president, prince. All those things have something in common. The idea is that these were guys to whom people listened. They were the natural leaders, either by right or by avocation. And they were the ones who would most be heeded when they gave their opinions. They were used to making decisions for other people. And honestly, that proved to be both a blessing and a curse later on. Their orders were pretty simple. Torah tells us exactly what was expected of them. And see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. Joshua's instructions were even easier than that. I mean, that was pretty simple instructions, right? Joshua just said, go, view the land, even Jericho. Okay. Dangerous? Oh yeah, it was very dangerous for them. Easy to screw up the intent? Not really. It's pretty easy to tell what they meant. So whom exactly did Moshe send? Verses 4 through 15 give us a long list of the names of the 12 spies, who their fathers were, and what tribes they were from. By the way, Ephraim's half-tribe provided the representative for the tribe of Joseph. Not important, just trivia. At first glance, there's only one name, Caleb, in that whole list that we recognize. But verse 16 clues us right at the end of the list. And, oh, by the way, Hoshea ben Nun had his name changed by Moshe to Yehoshua, Joshua. So Joshua and Caleb were the two spies that we remember. Son of a nun. Now in Joshua, in stark contrast to the detail in Numbers gives us half a page telling us who these people were. Scripture doesn't even tell us the names of the two spies that Joshua sent. This has led to a bit of speculation and commentary. Jewish tradition holds that one of them was Caleb, the spy from the 12, who brought a good report. And then another guy named Pinchas. You'll find these stories in Talmud. You'll find these stories in some Midrash. There's no scriptural basis for this. We have no idea what their source material was for attaching those two names. But those are the two names that they say. But you figure that if it was the original Caleb, he had to be at least 70 or 80 years old by the time. Not the best person who could be clambering down ropes outside the wall of Jericho. Now my favorite theory for who they were comes from Irwin Allen. Anyone remember Irwin Allen? No? He made some really cheesy science fiction shows in the 60s. Remember Lost in Space? That was his most famous one. And all the other ones were just as bad. They were great. One of the ones, the website is called The Time Tunnel. Has anyone seen The Time Tunnel? It's about these two guys who are sent back in time through a tunnel. And they spend each episode wandering around, trying not to get killed, sometimes trying to set history right, but usually just trying not to get killed until the tunnel can pick them up again and send them off to somewhere else. Now, in one episode, they actually arrived in the Middle East at the time just before Israel entered into the land. And these two scientists, these two guys from the future, ended up being the two spies. They got captured, they got brought to Joshua, and Joshua said, you know what, I'll let you live if you go do this for us, and you go to Jericho and you find out what's there. And how did they survive this? Because that's a pretty dangerous job. How did they know what to do? How did they speak Hebrew? No, that wasn't addressed. Anyway, how did they know what to do? They knew their Bible stories. They knew what the story of the two spies in Joshua was, and so they knew, to find Rahab. Go to Rahab's inn, and then they'd be safe there. So next time your little ones say, why do I need to learn all this stuff? I'll never use it. There's an example. You need to know your Bible stories in case you're tossed back in time and end up in one of these stories. It's the only way you're going to live. Now in the Brit Hadashah passage, it's all the Jewish believers, the ones to whom the letter was written, who are sent. The admonition to exhort one another daily, while it is called today, may be an indication that the role of Shaliach was expanding. Before, it was people who were qualified, specifically called and qualified to be sent for a particular job. Now, anyone who's a believer is sent. Even if you don't have a natural gift for it, you're sent to a certain extent. That can be scary. And so all the other believers are called on to encourage them. Tell them they're going to be able to do this. All right, so that was, let's see here, about 3,500 years ago, and then about 3,400 and 460 years ago, give or take. And then about, I think about 60 AD. Aaron probably got a better date for the book of Hebrews than me. Somewhere between 60 and 70 AD, I think. What about now? Well, we've covered a lot of time in the past 5 minutes, coming up to now. Let's look at who's being sent here and now. Now, warning, you're now part of the message. Okay? So here in this place, who are the Nasiim who are sent? Let's count them. If you have a post of authority in your local, state, or federal government, and you're physically able, stand up. Anybody? Police, mayor, city council, anything like that? Okay. How about if you're in leadership here in your faith community? Norm, it's you. Let's go ahead and stand up. Aaron, you teach in the Torah Club, you're in leadership. No one's going to argue that Sandy is the boss of our hospitality ministry, but she's not here, and we couldn't tell if she was standing up even if she was. Okay, how about in your work, now stay standing, yes. In your workplace, when you go to your job, is there anybody under you? Is there anybody who listens to what you just told them to do? If so, stand up. Okay, there's another one. And another one, okay. Some leading women here, I like that. How about in your home? Does anyone listen to you and what you say in your home? Does your wife listen to you? Does your husband listen to you? If so, stand up. How about the kids or grandkids? Dog? I'm not going to mention the cat because they don't listen to anybody. Now finally, just make sure that everybody realizes they're involved in this. Do you make decisions for yourself? Are you in charge of what you do on a day-to-day basis? Then stand up. Okay. If you've made the choice to submit yourself to Adonai, then you are in charge of that much of your life. At least you are in a position of authority over yourself, if nothing else. So, give yourselves a hand and stay standing. And while you're standing, I want you to take your right hand and put it up, and then reach it up in the air as high as you can. Okay, now tippy toes, and just stretch that out as far as you can. Okay, now take your left hand and do the same thing. Just reach it all the way up. Okay, now take both your arms like this and just shake them around. And go. Well, this is your stretching exercise. So now you can sit down because now you've got your blood flowing and you're awake, but you're relaxed. You can enjoy the rest of the message and not fall asleep. Except for Tina. Now, all these people who were sent, to what were they sent? Are all those who are sent meant to be spies? Because the first two examples are spies. Well, not exactly, usually. In fact, Paul makes it very clear they all have different jobs in the body of believers. I think the part of what we can take away from this theme, though, is that like spies, we need to be aware of our mission. And in our mission, we need to be aware of our surroundings. We need to know what it is that we're after, what we're doing. We need to know that God is with us. And we need to be aware of the threats that may keep us from accomplishing our task. Maybe by leading us in false direction. Maybe by tempting us and keeping us from following our mission at all. Maybe by tempting us in such a way that we abandon the Lord completely. And possibly end up back in a life of death as surely as a counterintelligent assassin kills a spy. That's a real danger in spiritual warfare. Do you feel encouraged about being sent at that point? Okay. So hopefully this will make you feel better. Now that you know that you are in some capacity sent, are you qualified for that job? Let's take a look at some shlichim from the scriptures and see if we measure up to their standard. Rav Shaul. Okay, Paul may not actually be the most helpful place to start. He's a lawyer, an expert in law and tradition, well-traveled, fluent in several languages, charismatic, hardworking, humble, simultaneously driven and rolling with the punches. That's a tough standard to live up to. It was, however, what was required for the most effective evangelist of the first century, and the author of a good chunk of the Brit Hadashah. And remember the old axiom, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. In Rav Shaul's case, the Lord knew what would be required of him. And he spent Paul's whole lifetime equipping him for that job, even before he knew he was going to be doing it. I bet if you look back over your own life, you'll see some episodes in your own life that, even though it didn't seem like a God thing at the time, has somehow equipped you for a ministry in which you're involved later in life. I know that's tremendously true in my case. How about Moses? Anyone live up to Moses? How qualified was he? He was the adopted son of Pharaoh. He was given the best education, the finest education available in the most powerful empire in the world at that time. He was comfortable in the hallways of power. He was used to being a leader. When he said, hey, go do this, they did that. Also, of course, he was a murderer, a fugitive, a lousy public speaker, constantly passing the blame on other people. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have chosen him myself, but fortunately, Hashem sees more in people than I do. Oh, here's a good one. Jonah. Yeah, Jonah was sent. That didn't go incredibly well at first. We actually don't know much about Jonah's early life, or his calling to ministry originally. We know his father was named Amittai, and he came from a town in Galilee just south of Nazareth. As an aside, that may be why Yeshua compared himself to Jonah. Maybe because at one point they had said, no prophet can come from Galilee, right? Now, mostly we know about his greatest failure, though, and his redemption from that sin. Don't forget that. Like all the prophets in the Tanakh, he had one overriding qualification to the ministry. The Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied. Now, if he, with the Ruach HaKodesh dwelling upon him, was qualified to be sent, how much more qualified are you with the Ruach HaKodesh dwelling within you? Just think about that for a second. Oh, here's one like Esther. As far as we know, as far as we have scriptural proof of, Esther was only sent once in her life. There's good evidence that she fulfilled other callings before and afterwards, but the only scriptural evidence we have is that this one calling, this one time when she was sent to stand before the king, the emperor of Persia, and stand before him, knowing that it was his whim whether she lived or died. I wouldn't want to do that. Anyone else? She didn't want to do that. That's true. Adonai could have miraculously given her the strength that she needed at that moment. Instead, he gave her a life of obedient service, coupled with a sure knowledge of her own self-worth. People tend to have an idea that if you're obedient and submit, it means you think you're worthless. Absolutely not. It means you know your place and your value. You do what your boss tells you, but you know you're worth that wage. And that gave her the strength in the easy times that she used in that one most difficult moment. Here's a good one. Samson. I can see you all laughing already. Samson was called even before being conceived. And he lived his whole life in that calling. Now, of course, he lived his life in that calling very, very badly. He was a boorish guy. He was a philanderer. He was a hedonist. Yeah, how he maintained the self-discipline to abstain from wine and not become a drunkard too is frankly beyond me. It must be a God thing. To put it bluntly, when Samson slew the 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, it may be the only time in history the one ass was swinging around part of another. And yet when the time came, God used him. Can you live up to that standard? Can you maybe even exceed it, I hope? Well, here's a good one. Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar was sent of the Lord. He was an evil king, worshipper of idols, given to megalomania and narcissism. When he had a 50-cubit statue of himself erected and he told people they had to worship it. And yet his calling, he had a calling of Adonai. He was sent to the people of God to destroy their nation, to raise their cities, to wipe out their households. The people is all that survived of Israel. And the people really are Israel, but their land, their homes, their businesses, their farms, their fields, all burnt to the ground. He even spent a few years hallucinating he was an animal, living out in the fields, grunting and eating grass. Yeah, that's one of the stories that didn't show up in Bible movies very often for kids. Although that really should be an encouragement for anyone who's dealt with mental health issues. You know, whether they're slight or serious. Obviously, he had some pretty serious mental health issues. And at the end of all that, he became a worshiper of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He was blessed to be allowed to write one of the very few passages in the Tanakh that's not written in Hebrew. If I remember right, I think there were 3. He wrote one of them, the longest one. Do you think he could be more qualified to serve Hashem than he started out to be? Oh, here's a good one. You're going to like this one. Yeshua. Yeah, nope. You're not qualified to perform his ministry. Not in any way, shape, or form. Neither am I. Neither is the most spiritual and clever person you've ever met. Nobody on the planet. Oh, come on, give me a break. I said you were qualified to be sent, not that you were qualified to be divine. Excuse me a second. Hot tea with a little honey. It's great for sore throat. Now, any discussion of being sent, at least in Messianic Christian circles, inevitably comes around to the Great Commission. You all know about the Great Commission, right? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Great Commission. Right, I worried that there are a couple hands that didn't go up. I may be in trouble here. It's where Yeshua commanded all his disciples to go out and evangelize to the ends of the earth. It's interesting, though, that the term Great Commission, near as historians can tell, was coined by a guy named Justinian von Veltz, a Dutch missionary in the very late 1800s. Many biblical scholars, building upon the work of people like Edward Riggenbach and J.H. Oldham, they believe that the commission was specifically to the 500 or so disciples that were there at the time that he gave it. And it was fulfilled in their lives. They went to the edges of the known world at the time. Before about 1650, nobody interpreted that as anything other than that. And beginning in 1650, people started having the idea that it might apply to all believers at all times. That's about the time that the church started moving past the idea that all scripture was allegorical and actually had a meaning, which seems like a duh thing to me, but wasn't always the point of view. And since then, it's been a driving force in the evangelical movement. So much so that many churches don't think you're really saved if you're not in the mission field, either locally or abroad. Despite what Paul said about that very subject, that's still one of the basic tenets of their faith. Who exactly was there to receive this commission? Well, first off, the 11 disciples. Wait, weren't there 12? Yeah, Judas was gone at this point. There were 12. They hadn't yet replaced him with what's his name that nobody can remember because he's only mentioned once when they said he replaced him. It's also assumed to include the 500 plus people who witnessed the resurrected Yeshua between his resurrection and his ascension. Not a huge number, but it's a big enough sample to include people of all social ranks. Rich people, poor people, influential people, nobodies. Surprisingly, it probably even included people of all different religious observance levels. You know, people, Pharisees who kept every inch of every tradition that they knew. And people said, yeah, I believe that Yeshua is Lord and God, and that's a great thing. That's pretty much all I need in my life. Paul wasn't there. In fact, at the time he was given, he hadn't even begun his whole, terrorize, arrest, and kill all followers of the way campaign. Does that mean he wasn't called or sent to make disciples? I wasn't there. Or you may think that I'm old and not that old. You weren't there. In fact, Yeshua is the only person you've ever met, or will in this lifetime, who was there at the giving of the Great Commission. Now, bringing things back around to the ranch, because we were still on track, but a small tangent. Let's return to the example of the 12 spies. They were sent, given a commission, and they went and fulfilled that commission. What was the commission they fulfilled? Well, we already talked about that, but that was a long time ago, back towards the beginning of the message. So I'll forgive you if you've forgotten it. And Moshe sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up unto the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not, and be of good courage, and bring up the fruit of the land. Now it's the time of the first ripe grapes. They were looking at this as a military campaign. So basic tactical reconnaissance was the order of the day. Check out the land. See if it's got good water supplies, good arable land, farming, shepherding, good natural produce, trees, things like that. Essentially, see if the land's really worth conquering. Now, in this case, you see, we already see the undercurrents of the lack of faith in Adonai that was showing among the people. Because they weren't sure if God's promises were really as good as he said they were going to be. Now, what goes hand in hand with the cost analysis, or benefit analysis, comes the cost analysis. They would check out the defenses of the land. Were the cities well fortified? Did they have thick walls or cost a lot of men to breach? They were. Were the inhabitants big, tough guys? Yeah, they were. In fact, they were B'nai Anak, the Anakim. Anyone familiar with the Anakim? Genesis Rabbah 16 says that the sons of Anak were of the same race as the Nephilim, Rephaim, and Giborim. In other words, they were the offspring of fallen angels and women. Big, scary dudes who wore heaps of chain upon their neck because they were just that strong. As for their size, Midrash records several stories about them, all apocryphal, all pretty fantastic. One of the most interesting, I like this one, comes from a Midrashic fragment that's found in the 13th century. And it says, the daughter of Anak had gone into her father's garden and taken a pomegranate. which she ate after having peeled off the skin, and she cast the skin aside. Then the 12 spies came, and seeing her father, were struck with fear, and hid themselves under the pomegranate skin, believing it to be a cave. Now the daughter of Anak, in the meantime, came back, and seeing the pomegranate skin lying there, was afraid lest her father might scold her for lack of neatness. She therefore took the pomegranate skin, with the 12 spies hidden therein, and cast it out of the garden, noticing the weight added by the 12 men, no more than if the skin had been the shell of an egg. Average weight of, big, burly, tough fighting men, 150 to 200 pounds. There were 12 of them. We're talking a little over half a ton. And she didn't even notice. Now, of course, surely these are greatly embellished tales. But they do carry the kernel of truth, and the Anakim were big and scary guys. So, all in all, did the spies fulfill their commission? Think about that for a second. Actually, yes, all 12 did everything they were told. All 12 checked out the land. They checked its defenses and its people just as Moshe instructed. The only thing they did wrong was that upon returning, instead of confidentially reporting their findings to Moses and Aaron, Scripture indicates they told their stories to the leaders and also to the whole congregation of the children of Israel, along with their tactical analysis. That's where we get into a problem. Like Nadab and Abihu, they took it upon themselves to do even more than was required of them. And also like Nadab and Abihu, serious consequences resulted. Resulted from overzealous obedience without the relationship and discernment to understand the will of Adonai. So why then were 10 chastised and all Israel punished, while 2 were blessed? Because they all reported the same facts. The 10 brought 40 years of punishment, essentially a life sentence, actually a life sentence, upon their people, because while they saw the challenges to overcome, they evaluated them by their own strength, not figuring in the promises of the Lord. The Lord promised to fight the battles for them. They were looking at, could we win this battle? How could all 12 see the same thing and come back with such different reports? They didn't. They all reported the same things they saw. All 12 reported the high walls, tough warriors, and giants, along with the fantastic produce of the land. The difference was in the interpretation, and that depends on your point of view. Now, we've all heard stories, I think, of how different witnesses at a traffic collision will all see the same event and give wildly different descriptions of what happened. Say an orange Volkswagen runs into a green Toyota. And some guy will say it was 2 blue cars, and another guy will say it was a big old dump truck that ran over this little kid. Eventually the police will have to sort of find the average, the common ground between all of them, and figure out that, well, yeah, somebody hit somebody. And they have to write the report which they can verify. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about here anyway. Let me put it away, which all of us here can probably relate, because I know we've all had first-hand experience with this. Now pretend for a minute that a newcomer comes into the narthex. I love that word, narthex. He comes into the lobby. Okay. And he asks Tina, Aaron, and myself, what's the temperature like in the room? Now pretend also there's a big old digital thermometer on the wall over there. It says it's 69.5 degrees Fahrenheit. We're all going to go back and report that it's 69.5 degrees in there. But Aaron and Tina are going to tell them it's really, really cold. You should probably go to your car and get a parka and come back in. I'm going to go and tell them it's nice and comfortably cool in there. Your shirt sleeves are fine. Just come in and enjoy yourself. We all reported the same facts, but our interpretation is different, based on our point of view. The 10 spies saw through the eyes of their own strength. They saw the opposition. They knew that their own fighting force could never, ever win against them. Now, I've got to bring up something that's not directly on track. It's a little bit of an aside, but it applies directly to this, to why they were thinking this. I think the census in Numbers chapter 1 has been really badly mistranslated throughout the years. I'm not alone, and there are a lot of scholars who agree with me, a lot of scholars who disagree with me. You see, you've probably heard about how Israel had 603,000 fighting men. It went for a total population running into about 2 million people. Right? At least 1 million, closer to 2 million, probably. All the wives, children, camp followers, everything else. The trouble is that the word commonly turned into thousands is Aleph. It should probably be read as aluf. Same letters, different vowels. And Aleph means thousands. Aluf means contingents or families. For example, Numbers 141, instead of saying 41,500, should probably be read as 40 clans for 1,500. Does that make sense? Because it says 40 Aleph, and then 1 Aleph, and then 500. Now this gives a total fighting force for Israel, if you add all those numbers up, of 5,550 instead of 603,550. Big difference there. Now given that the largest fighting force ever assembled in the world at that time was a little less than around 200,000 men, the spies would have no reason that a force of 600,000 could easily conquer anything they came across, right? There's no reason to fear going in. Because they've got 3 of the biggest armies ever seen. No matter the size of the giants or the walls. On the other hand, if you've only got 5,500, 3,000 men could be easily lost in that kind of a military campaign. That would be devastating to Israel. Losing 3,000 of you're losing over half of your childbearing age men over the course of a year, the nation would very likely not be able to survive another 2 generations. That's a sobering thought, and that explains why the 10 spies came back and said, hey, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Caleb and Joshua, on the other hand, they saw through eyes of faith. Honestly, though, Joshua seemed a little convincing, because if you read through it, Caleb at first comes back and says, no, we can do this because the Lord says we were going to do this. And then a little later on, Joshua comes up and says, oh yeah, he's right. Okay. Caleb and Joshua believed that Adonai would fight for them. So that while their force was small, and honestly pretty ill-equipped, they'd be unstoppable. Because the enemy, no matter how great, could never defeat Adonai Tzevaot, the Lord of hosts. Conquering Canaan with a numerically overwhelming force, that'd be no big deal. But with fewer than 6,000 fighters, and a total population of about 10 to 15,000 people, that's a divine miracle. That's what the 2 spies trusted in. So that's a lot of interesting and occasionally controversial information. Raise your hand if you're still awake. And most of us. Again, as predicted. All right. Now raise your hand if you're saying to yourself, that's cool and all, but what does it have to do with me? Yeah. First, know that you have either been, are being, or will someday be sent. The Lord has a purpose and a plan for you. Going back to Paul's analogy of us all being different parts of the body, some are hands, some feet, some eyes or ears, some a mouth, some a really big mouth. Nobody in his kingdom has no value, though. There's not a single appendix in the body of Messiah. Second, know what your job is. You have spiritual gifts, and they define your place in the body. They tell you what your commission is. You may have a gift for teaching his word, or praising him in music and dance. You may have the gift of hospitality, making people, both familiar and new, feel welcome and comfortable. As a preacher, it's my job to make them feel uncomfortable. Your job is to make them comfortable. You may even have the gift of kissing boo-boos, stopping a small child's tears. All of these, and myriads more, are vital to reaching people with the good news of Mashiach and making disciples of them. And if you don't know what your spiritual gifts are, find out. Try different things, different ministries, until you find the one that hits a resonant frequency with your nefesh, your soul. It may not be one you thought you'd like. It may not be something you really enjoy doing, but it's something when you do it, it feels right. You feel like this is what I was meant to do. Pray daily. If that's all you can manage, then daily is probably maybe enough. Ask the Ruach to reveal your path to you, especially if it's something you don't feel sure about. And maybe even more especially if it's something you do feel sure about. And then once you've asked for the Lord to reveal this to you and he reveals it to you, ask for confirmation. Because the Lord never has a problem confirming his word to you, because he knows that it's wise to ask for it. Third, do what you're told. Once you receive your commission, your marching orders, follow them. Don't be like Jonah and run away in rebellion, or Samson and ignore the leading of your gifts. If you do, you just end up with a big fish or with a bad haircut. Fourth, even though we said this was dangerous, go above and beyond. Be aware, though, that you're doing it according to your own point of view. Now, this can get dangerous. Just ask Aaron's two sons. Aaron in the Bible, not you. But you can't serve your God and King by only doing the bare minimum of what you were tasked with. Has anyone ever had a job and kept it and got promoted because they did exactly what was in the job description and nothing more? Yeah, that doesn't happen. Fourth, I already said fourth. Spend some time in Scripture, especially the bits that relate to your specific calling, and spend enough time communing with the Almighty that you're confident that you feel his will directing you. And then you know what? You're going to screw it up. Yeah, we all do. But be grateful to Adonai that he forgives our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And finally, be part of your tribe. I can very nearly promise that your calling is not to sit alone in your house and never interact with anyone. Nowhere in Scripture or Talmud or any commentary is hermitry listed as a spiritual gift. Unless, of course, you're really unpleasant and smell bad, in which case it might be a gift to everybody else. On the other, for the other 999,999,999 of us out of a billion, remember that you are part of the body. If you're a foot, carry the hands where they need to go to do his work. And heed the help of the eye when it warns you that you're about to run over the cliff. Accept help, give help as required. You're not meant to be the whole mission of the Lord. Again, Yeshua was the only one qualified to do that. But you are needed to do your part of it. Can you do that much? Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe. Heavenly Father, we come before you again, just grateful to be diving into your word. We thank you for the opportunity to share the lessons in your scriptures, the wisdom of those who have come before us. We always ask that you would give us the discernment and the wisdom to pull from that what we need. Everyone here today needs something slightly different from you. We all need your presence. But Lord, you're infinite, and many of us need different aspects of your presence at different times. And Lord, you are faithful to give what is needed. Not necessarily what is wanted, but what is needed. Lord, as we conclude this service and lead ourselves out into the world, we pray that you would allow us to be led by you. You would keep us safe as we witness to the world, to everyone that we meet, Lord, to everyone we interact with, that they would see us and know, after the first few words with us, that, hey, there's something different about us, and it's you. It's you dwelling in us. Lord, just keep a hand of protection upon each of us. Keep a hand of protection upon your believers around the world, among your people around the world, and upon your land. In the name of Messiah, we pray all these things. Shem Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.